thankless but great public service for your community is serving on a school board. So I've known Krista Flanagan for like 20 years. And so for the last 7 years, she has been a great servant of the community of Oregon, Wisconsin. Okay. My friends here know I went to school in Oregon. Okay. So without further ado, I'll let Krista Flanagan come on up here and then she can introduce our superintendent.
Great, thank you. Good afternoon. Thank you for having us. Rob said, my name is Krista Flanagan. I'm an Oregon School Board President. I've had that position for a couple of years, but I've been on the board for 7 years. And I'm really honored that our superintendent, Dr. Leslie Bergstrom, can join us today too. So we're just going to talk with you a little bit about the landscape of K-12 education right now. So it's there's some things that are some challenges for us right now, but we promise we're going to end on a good note and tell you about all the wonderful things our kids are doing too. So I just want to walk you through some of the things that are in front of us right now and share some facts with you. So we'll do that as we head through the presentation.
Of course, they're not getting the right thing to, oh, darn. Oops, there it goes.
Right. So in Oregon School District, we really have a proud tradition. We really work with our families. We have about 2,800 families and 4,100 students in our district. And so we spend a lot of time talking with the parents and the kids in our district about what their educational experience means to them. And so if you go to the next slide, like most school districts, our mission is to help them learn so that they have rewarding lives when they leave our district. We want them to prepare for whatever is next for them, whether it's a job, a four-year college, a military career, whatever that is. Our job is to help students acquire the skills, knowledge, and attitudes to achieve their individual potential. Our community came up with these 5 values. So that's a little bit different. We brought about 250 community members together and said, what's important to you about our school district? And they came up with these 5 things: the whole child emphasis, strong family and community partnerships, educational equity. So each child has the opportunity to thrive, and then caring and professional educators and relevant and empowering learning experience. We are a people-driven business, right? And so that's what we do. We have people working to care for our kids to make sure they're prepared for their future. You want to go to the next slide? So what are the challenges? And this is not just Oregon School District. What are the challenges facing school districts in Wisconsin and across the country? And there are really 3 different areas. One is lack of state funding. So I'm going to talk about that in just a minute and give you some statistics and facts about what's happening in the state of Wisconsin. Continuing to retain and attract educators. There's a lot less people going into the education profession, and that is really impacting the schools today. And then the ability to meet needs of all of our students. We'll talk with you a little bit about what our kids are facing these days, and a lot of you are familiar with that, but we'll kind of go into a little bit of the detail for that. So those are the things we're going to chat about today. So the first is state of Wisconsin school funding. So back in 2002, excuse me, Wisconsin was doing very well in education. We were funding our programs. We were 11th in the nation in terms of investment in our K-12 schools, and that was 11% above the national average. Okay, moving forward, up to 2020, we've fallen to 25th, and now we are 6% below the national average in terms of what our state is investing in public education, which is interesting because in the Wisconsin State Constitution, it says the state is responsible for funding of free public education. And so this is where we've fallen. And then if you click again, what this shows you is the largest drop in national rankings of any state in the nation during this time period. And that includes 0% increases for funding for public schools in 21-22 and 22-23. So that means we're going to fall further when we do one now. We've gone from 11th to 25th and we're falling further. In addition to that, in terms of a per pupil spending increase, in terms of that's one of the ways we get funding from the state. We can't generate our own revenue. That money comes from the state. We are 48th in the nation in terms of increase of per pupil spending to keep up with inflation from 2002 to 2020. And if you look at, that's the 3rd smallest increase of any state in the nation, except for these 2 states. So we are the only states that are worse than us, Idaho and Indiana right now. And we're also the lowest special education reimbursement state in the nation for any state that reimburses their schools for public special education. So we are mandated to provide special education students services for those students. States reimburse for that. We have the lowest reimbursement rate of any school in the nation or any state in the nation that does that. And the next challenge is less teachers are going into the profession. So if you look at the UW-Madison School of Education or Edgewood College, there's a 35% drop nationally of people that are choosing to go into the profession of education. So there's less people out there that we have to recruit and retain to teach our kids. So that's we're from the 2008, 2009 school year, so it's a 35% drop. And now let's talk about our kids. Our kids have just been through a pandemic, which we're still kind of seeing the effects of, and you can see them here, some of the what is stressors that are facing our kids, or what are the barriers to their care. And a lot of them are dealing now with mental health issues. And so in school districts, we're not just teaching kids, we have to get them in a place to learn. If they're hungry, they can't learn. If they're stressed and have a lot of anxiety or experiencing trauma, they can't learn. And so we can't just say, oh, I'm sorry. We've got to make kids, help kids with services and support so they actually can learn. So that's the other big challenge that we're facing right now. And you can see some of these statistics, 24% increase or 31% increase in our adolescents in terms of what they've been dealing with. I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Bergstrom to talk a little bit about the impact that has on our district.
Well, I'm happy to be here because I'm a Rotarian also. I'm with the Oregon Rotary. And I know, when I left the house today, I was running a little late and I thought, oh, I should have got my pen. So, I know, I'm learning a little bit from you guys. You're happy and sad. We have brags and bummers, but we don't pay for them. And I like that idea. That was good. So anyway, I'm happy to be here. I have been in education for over 30 years and I've been a superintendent for going on 3. And sadly, I sometimes think of myself as a COVID superintendent because I started right when the pandemic started, right? So it's been a wild ride because first it was pandemic related pieces, which of course hasn't gone away. And now it's really the impact of the change in state funding and how that's impacting school districts, not just Oregon. We're here to talk big picture, right? We're here to talk about school districts throughout the area, throughout Wisconsin. So what impact has it been having on operations of school districts? Next slide, please. Well, I want to first build off of what Krista Flanagan just said, and that is, we know that the role of schools is more than teaching math and reading. I think our jobs would be much easier if people came to school ready to learn all the time in the right state of mind to be able to learn all the time. That simply isn't how it is. And so it's part of our job to make sure that they are in the place where the learning can happen. There's a woman who wrote a book called Culturally Responsive Teaching on the Brain, and she talks about the fact that when a child is coming in and they're seeing threats within their environment, and that can be interpreted a lot of different ways, right? That they experience an amygdala hijack. And so they get in that fight or flight response within a classroom, and that certainly isn't the place where you can learn. So we do have to make sure that we're providing services that make learning accessible. And that includes mental health. And if you look up here, this is results from the Dane County Youth Survey. And it's really a really excellent piece of information for schools throughout the county. Because if your school participates, and I think the vast majority do, we have been able to see long-term how students are reporting related to a variety of factors. Here right now, you're just seeing what they're reporting related to their own emotional health. Of course, there's also alcohol and drug statistics. There's statistics on the number of family dinners that they have, because that is a really big indicator of how well they're doing overall, which is fascinating to me. Fascinating. But for mental health, you see the first column there, or excuse me, the first column is a list of symptoms that students are asked to say whether or not they feel this way, the frequency to which they feel this way. So I think it's the top 2. So what's that frequently and always, I think are what we're reporting out here. So for Dane County Youth Survey in 2021, so they only give it every 3 years. You see, when you add the urban and suburban schools together, 27% of the students reported feeling always and often anxious and worried. Now, that's a lot, right? That's a lot of kids. And if you go all the way back down to what's underneath the picture on the top, that's me actually. Underneath my picture that's on the top, that's the year 2012. And so you can see 2012, that was 20%. 2021, we're up to 27. So these numbers related to students and how they feel emotionally, the numbers that are of concern are increasing. One thing that we've only been tracking since 2018, and that is the number of students accessing mental health services outside of school. And the 14% there for the fact that they do access, that is just Oregon. It was 11% in urban and suburban this last year. And here are some of the things we've done related to that. In Oregon specifically, we have increased the number of positions we have within the school district that support students and their mental health. So we've added social workers, we've added some counseling FTE, some school psychologists FTE, and we've also formed partnerships with outside mental health organizations to come in and provide appointments within the school day so that parents don't have to pick their children up and take them somewhere. They can have their appointment right there in school. So schools have been looking at this data and trying to figure out ways to increase the supports that are available to students. A, because it's the right thing to do when kids are suffering, but B, because it makes our students ready to learn. And we are a learning institution. So those are some of the things that have been impacting schools, not just in Dane County. This is nationwide. These are just the statistics that we're able to show you because this is where we live. Next slide. So knowing that student needs are increasing, specific to mental health, but academic needs, those are always present, and we're always working to provide the proper supports for students and their academic needs. So when you think about all that, you think, okay, what's the budget look like? Now, this is Oregon, but this could be anywhere Wisconsin. This is not just Oregon. As a matter of fact, I'm a little bit of a groupie related to school board meetings. And I look at other people's school board packets because I want to make sure that we are, all of our statistics and all of our data is somewhat aligned, and it is. Because right now you can see the Oregon School District's operating budget, 90% of it is determined by the state. We don't have any other way to increase funding. The state tells us what the revenue limit is for a school district. Now, the other 10%, we don't have control over that either. That's mostly federal funds, et cetera. So that's out of our control. And our operating budget, 80% of our operating budget is spent on staffing and benefits. As Ms. Flanagan said, it's people business. That makes sense that most of our money goes to people. And then what's happened in the last 2 years is we've had 2 years in a row of $0 increase in per pupil funding, which of course has meant a lot during such an inflationary time. So if school districts are giving any raises to the people within their school district, then they're either going into fund balance, which is sort of like a district's savings account that they're required to have in order to have enough cash for before property taxes come in. They're either paying for raises with fund balance, which just creates a giant fiscal cliff, or they are using one-time funds and then kind of hoping that the financial situation changes. But many of you are in business, paying something operationally with one-time funds just leads to a problem down the road. And we're all about to experience the problem that's down the road, if you don't mind. I often use this to illustrate the fact that in the past, the change in CPI from the previous year, that's the blue line, and the change in funding from the previous year, that's the orange line, stays pretty close. It stays pretty close together. It's just been in the past 2 years that CPI has taken off and funding has taken a dip. And as I said, it has an impact. For our district in particular, that means that nobody's received an increase to base pay in 2 years. Other districts have used one-time funds, which I understand because it's very competitive out there right now. Very competitive as far as trying to attract good people. But that just means they've got a problem next year instead of this year. So what are people doing? School districts, what solutions do they have? Go right ahead. As I said, some are using one-time funds, federal funds that come in, and that's a good short-term solution. It just creates a problem down the road. Some are reducing services. They're doing things called right sizing, which for most districts hasn't really led to layoffs. It's more been about not filling retirees positions, trying to find a way to reduce services and perhaps increase class sizes. Some went to referendum last April. Quite a few are going to referendum this April. And what our business director says, and he's been doing it for 30 years, he's really, really very excellent. And he says that there are 421 school districts in the state of Wisconsin. If funding doesn't change, the way funding is going doesn't change, there'll be 421 referendums. Because that is a school district's only possibility for increasing funding past the state revenue limit. So here's what we did, but we're just one district, as I said, out of 421. We changed health insurance. That saved $600,000. People didn't like it. And I'm sure you can imagine why. For some people, that meant changing their doctors in the middle of a pandemic. But sometimes you just have to do what's fiscally responsible, even if it's unpopular. And we used our ESSER funds, the one-time federal funds, we used them for pandemic-related stuff. We had to buy computers. We rented giant tents for our band students to go outside and play, so that they were going to expel all their breath through a tuba. In the middle of the pandemic, we're like, let's do that outside. So we got a big tent, several big tents. And we did some debt restructuring in order to decrease any impact of a potential referendum. Yeah, so that was our approach, but everybody's approach has been somewhat different. So depending on where you live, you might be learning a lot about whatever school district your home is in and how they've approached it. Right ahead. Oh, this is a big one. So you've probably heard a lot about one-time funds from federal money funneled through the state, right? So August 30th, there was a big announcement. There was all this money coming to schools, and that was fantastic. That was great. But remember, it was one-time money, and 80% of our budget is staff and benefits. So what we did is, because of inflation and the fact that diesel for the buses was going up, and what it costs to heat our buildings, everything was going up, and we had no additional money. We started out with a $650,000 deficit in our budget. We've never had a deficit budget before, at least not in the last 30 years. So that was concerning. So we took this 350 and we applied it to the deficit for this year. So the deficit will exist the following year, but we've got it covered, half of it covered with one-time funds for this year. And then we're also super appreciative of the mental health, the money for mental health supports. So as I said, we've hired people, and that's great. And the people we've hired, we'd love to keep. But additional money, we're getting to the point where there aren't people to hire. I'm sure you've all experienced that in whatever field of work you're in right now, but we have a hard time in education, because there are fewer people going into it. And so if there's only a certain number of graduates coming out, we're all scrambling, trying to make our place the best place to be. And when you can't add any money to the salary schedule, that gets to be a challenge. But also for ensuring that there are enough people to provide the mental health supports that our young people need. That's become an issue too. So everything I've said is the reason why you probably read about a referendum in your local paper or wherever you are, because we're all facing the same thing. Our solutions might be somewhat different, but the problem is no additional funding and increasing prices and a lot of competition for getting people. As an example, when I first started in Oregon, I was a high school associate principal. That's what I was hired to do. And we would have, like, let's say an open social studies position, and we'd have 150, 200 applicants. And that was a lot of work to read 200 applications, but it was pretty exciting that there were that many people who wanted to have that job, right? Then I talked to an elementary principal and they would tell me that's nothing. I just had 600 applicants for our second grade position. Oh, wow, that's fantastic. And now we're doing a little happy dance if we get 30 applicants. That's really exciting because that isn't happening as much anymore. And it has nothing to do with the districts. It's throughout all of the districts. It's just the way the world is going. So I try to get every one of my kids to go into education. I have 3, they're all adults, not a single one. But my sister's kids, I have 2 out of 4 so far, so we'll see how much lucky I get with the other 2. And then, of course, we asked our community, what do you think? Because as Krista said, we have to work together. And we ask them, what's important to you? Knowing what we're facing, what's important to you? And this is really what they told us. We want you to continue to have the best educators. We want you to keep class sizes reasonable. They're not too big, they're not too small. We want you to provide mental health services. And we want to be able to be competitive. Because I tell you, I can make up with being a good place to work. I can make up several $1,000s, right? Somebody might not leave us to earn a few $1,000s more if the culture of the workplace is a really good one.
True.
But when the district down the road can offer them $10,000 more, then it becomes a bigger discussion. So that's what we're a little concerned about falling into that area, which you probably experienced in your jobs too. And then, so that's what we're facing. And I think we're going to go to the good news now, right? Is there one more? Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Okay, this is the fun stuff. And that is the great stuff that continues to happen. Yes, we're facing challenges, but we're also facing beautiful things every day, right? We have kids who are, this is our first grade teacher, Stacy Sargent, with one of her children. This is a read aloud that's happening. Look at this little math rug that they all sit around. Schools are great places for kids to be. They even are now. Kids don't know that nobody's got a raise. Nobody knows that. They shouldn't. That's none of their business. They're still getting the excellent service that they should be getting, right? We have students out here on the construction site. It's good stuff is happening all over. One more slide if you don't mind. Yeah. This is our summer school program. We had older kids walking the younger kids around the high school to find their summer school classes. Lisa knows all about that because Lisa's always there trying to make sense out of the chaos. We have our kids in the gardens and our swimming lessons, our music programs, our cooking programs. Most importantly, we have strong relationships with our kids. I think they feel the love. Go ahead, George.
I get $7,000 a year in my property tax to the schools.
Yes.
Does that money go to the state and then come back to the schools?
No, the state puts a limit on how much that we can come to us through either property taxes or state aid. It's like a teeter-totter, right? If they're giving us more state aid, then we can collect less in property taxes. So yes, it does. That part of it goes to us. But then in addition, we're also told how much we're able to take out of property taxes. They pretty much.
No, I know
decide
that, but what you're saying that almost all of it, 90% comes from the state.
Mhm.
Well, where's my $7,000?
It's through setting the revenue limit. That's what it is. They say it's either property taxes or funding from us. So that's where the state determines, not your property taxes. That's a great question. Nobody's even asked that before.
That's strange, yeah. Madison was what, 136 teachers short at the beginning? Have they filled that, or what's going on there?
Moving down, but they're not there yet. So, some of the options that school districts are looking for is what Madison did, virtual teachers. So they have should have multiple classrooms. And so they just have people monitoring the classrooms, but they're teaching virtually. Or going to 4 days. Older, yes.
Older
Yeah.
kids.
They're going to, some school districts are going to 4 days a week to both try and entice new teachers to come there because it's a 4-day work week, but they can't pay for the transportation cost of busing the kids 5 days a week. And so there's some really interesting ideas out there in terms of how we're all going to kind of make this work.
Mm-hmm. Some imagination. Get rid of the whiteboards.
Yes, go ahead.
I really appreciate you addressing us all in it together.
Yeah.
As a state, and so we can just be borrowing and pointing fingers. I really appreciate that. And I say that because we're going to put you on the spot for a question, because you're an honest person and it seems like your answer to what the future is. What is going on in schools as it relates to elementary kids not going to school and social services not doing anything about that? I understand middle school and high school kids, it's more complex. But if an elementary child is not in school And this is happening a lot. And I'm not talking about COVID.
I know.
Before before COVID, but what is being done to get elementary kids into school who aren't there in the state?
Ooh, that's super interesting. I can't talk about Wisconsin. I can talk about Oregon and what we do. So I certainly am. We're in Dane County. And when a young child doesn't show up to school and there's no call from the parent and no answer from the parent, then we do something called a well child check. So either we go over there and we're accompanied by our school resource officer, or for some reason, if we're not able to, the school resource officer goes, because it could be anything. For all we know, the parent thought the child was on the bus and then they never made it to school. We can't wait all day. We're making these calls in the first half hour school's there. And so what do we do if even after we call and a parent answers the door and they're just continually having excuses of why this child doesn't come to school? Well, there is the option of truancy court, and that's not a super popular option because a lot of people say that the legal system doesn't necessarily make it any better, right? Sometimes it can even make it more complicated. But when we're talking about young children who aren't coming to school and there's no legal reason why they're not coming to school, then we feel that that's a viable path forward.
Can I just follow up on the teacher shortage
Sure.
thing for a second? Because, I remember not that long ago, there was a vacancy in the Madison Metropolitan School District. They have hundreds of.
Oh, yeah.
As I mentioned before, my sister teaches second grade at Lowell School here on the east side. They had a fourth grade vacancy that was available because of retirement that they were not able to fill at all this year. So they went from 3 fourth grade classes to 2. Does anybody know why the number of new teachers is declining? I mean, is it that the wages aren't competitive, or there's so many challenges?
It's a whiteboard, they can't teach. That's true.
Haven't heard about that, but who knows what individuals could say about something like that. But a bigger picture, we saw a huge decline right around the time that Act 10 was put into place, but I'm not blaming it on Act 10. I'm talking about sort of the way we began to talk about public service, people in public service in general. Not even a Wisconsin thing. I think it's bigger than that, right? And people started to say, "Well, geez, I don't know if I want to put up with that." And so there are other options. There are other options if you love children. There are other options if you're creative. There are lots of other options that weren't there before. And when we have an atmosphere where people feel like maybe they're not valued very much, then they're going to pick other options. That's the same for any profession. If you don't feel valued, you don't want to be there. So I think that has a lot to do with it. And I'd love to learn what other countries have done. We read about it all the time, but you can't take another country's solution and superimpose it on your culture. It's just very different.
Not all of us know what Act 10.
Oh, that was back. Do you want to give a good explanation? I'm trying to think about how to say it. It was when we were made it so we no longer legally had to negotiate with unions.
Go ahead. Our daughter, one of our daughters has been a special ed teacher in Madison School District, middle schools, 7th through 9th graders, emotion disturbed, behavioral disturbed.
Wow, that takes a huge skill set.
And for 28 years, I don't know how she does it.
Yeah.
But the biggest thing, and every year, the discipline, the lack of respect of these kids for teachers is growing and growing. And it's absolutely amazing how she contends with that. What she does, but she had, I think it was back in 97, she had a restraining order. She was the only special ed teacher in the country to have a restraining order against a student.
Oh, my.
And in their wisdom, the Madison School Board said the child could not be closer than 50 feet from her. So it was amazing. It's amazing. I don't know how she's done it. She still loves the job. She loves working with kids, but she said that the hardest thing is every year there's a decline in respect for authority.
You can see that. Here, go ahead.
You talked about the increase in the per pupil funding.
Yeah.
But how do we rank Wisconsin or Dane County? How do we rank in just the per pupil funding amount nationally?
Oh, okay. Thank you. That was a good one. So we had a chart on our the change in per pupil funding, and we were third to lowest in the country for the change in funding, and we're 25th in the maybe we need to go back. Yeah, 25th in the country for the percentage increase in per pupil funding. As far as a dollar amount per pupil, I'm not sure where we rank on the dollar amount per pupil. My guess is it's probably in the middle to the lower half.
Yeah, if you compare us to a state like Minnesota that continue to increase their investment in per student, and that is a symptom of that statistic is a symptom of that we have not kept up and we're falling, which is kind of the total investment. So if you compare us to a state like Minnesota, whoo.
Yeah. Yes, sir.
Are there any statistics that indicate that the lack of two parents in a family have caused a lot of this problems, these problems?
Well, I think that there are lots of societal concerns that play out in families that influence our kids. Absolutely. But I would also say that I'm sure many of us grew up in single parent households and are successful people today. So I don't know if that's always the case. However, I do agree that society is reflected in our family composition, and it's reflected with the attitudes and ideas that kids bring into schools.
Actually, American the State Journal yesterday, there's a lead story about referendums and some of the impacts here. And it's a fairly quick read, but it talks about the referendums are a reaction to the decisions made at the state level to not increase funding. And it's bad enough in Oregon and maybe Madison, but smaller school districts around the state that are losing pupils and have less flex. You can imagine the smaller budget, the impact, and they're trying to attract teachers, but it's at a crisis stage. And you can be partisan if you want. This was set in motion by Act 10, and it's really kind of.
Yeah, I mean, one thing I would say, I grew up in a very small town. I'm from a town called Florida, between Owen, Claire, and Wausau. And when I graduated, I had 60 kids in my class. Today, they're lucky to have 30, and they can't keep teachers. They have no business program anymore. They don't have any foreign language. They can't keep a superintendent, so they don't have the income to pull from the community either. So, if we're talking about these issues in Dane County, right? Think about rural Wisconsin. They're really, really in trouble.
Well, one way is to consolidate school districts, but in the lose community support if the kids are going a long ways away. So
and your transportation costs. I mean, one of our biggest expenses as a school district is transportation costs, right? And so you look at those, so people talk about, yeah, let's consolidate, but your transportation costs have just gone through the roof now. And so you've got to balance those things. So it's a really interesting thing. And we brought a group of community members together to kind of talk about this. And of course, they were really good ideas. Let's apply for more grants. Let's see if we can come up with a revenue solution. And we're talking $50 million budget, right? So it's a really interesting situation that we and that's why we appreciate the invitation just to kind of share with you some of the statistics that this is what's happening.
Oh, I got 3. That's awesome. 1, 2, 3. Go ahead.
What are you doing about your students that have alcohol and drug problems? I represent Dane Horizon High School, and I don't think we have anybody from Oregon in there this year. And I'm surprised to know that you don't have anybody that is trying to recover from the alcohol or drug abuse.
Well, it certainly is an option because it's a successful option. As a matter of fact, our former village president, I think, worked there for a while at Horizon High. Steve Staten. I don't know if you remember him, but I remember he was there when they were initially getting things off the ground. Yeah. So oftentimes alcohol and drug use we're finding is actually a symptom of a mental health concern. So that's where we're putting a lot of our resources in addressing the mental health piece, knowing that they also then have to address the addiction component, right? So we do have someone on site whose specialization is in that area. But honestly, we find we really are able to do a lot of good when we get at the mental health component that drove the addiction in the first place. complicated. Lisa, you were next.
Again, as many of you know, I've been with after school clubs for 19 years. We've been in existence for 35 years. We have a collaborative effort with the school district, exceptional one. And we all feed out all teachers and administrators and so forth like that. When you see these pictures and so forth like that, many of our children that we both are teaching are part of the school district as well as our facility and so forth. Oregon has been exceptional. I mean, everybody talks really well with each other, administrators, teachers, and so forth to best serve the children. I look at, and I don't know if you can answer this, you know, Tony Evers gave money for all these mental health issues. And granted, with COVID, even before COVID, mental health issues now are finally coming to the forefront where people are finally talking about it. And so money is given to that way, but then money isn't given per pupil. It doesn't make any sense. I know that you can't answer that, but the mental health issue has been huge. And you know how people lobby for different kinds of things. It's like, okay, the right people lobbied, or I don't even know, that had the discussion groups, the webbing and everything else for this mental health. Now, why can't we get funding so that, you know what, we don't have to have teachers, whether you come from Middleton, Oregon, Evansville, or whatever, keeping our same teachers there to give that continuity of care is huge. When you had the same teacher that maybe you had when you were with the school district and your children do and so forth, it's a win-win situation.
Yeah, I mean, I'll address some things because I won't put Leslie on the spot, but there are a lot of, I think it's becoming more well known. There's more media coverage of the per pupil and not increasing. So there are a lot of external groups or nonprofits being founded to say, how can we get together with business organizations in this state and say, we need to educate our kids, right? This is really going to help us in terms of the economic development as a state. And so I think those things are starting to form too. I will tell you though, per pupil funding has to come through the legislature. And it's a fact, Governor Evers has tried to get the legislature to gavel in, and they've gavelled in and gavelled out within 30 seconds to have this conversation about. And so, but on the other hand is the legislature has really said that we want communities to tell you how important your public schools are to you. So they're saying that is the way that we want it to go in terms of referendum. And so, you know, however you feel, that's the way it is right now in terms of the legislature saying we are putting it on the local communities and school districts. You need to go to referendum because if you want more local control, your community has to tell you what kind of schools they want. I don't agree with that. I think it's a state legislature obligation to fund public education, but that's just me.
Yes, sir.
I appreciate your comments about mental health issues in schools. I was part of an effort in the Middleton Cross Plains area school district a few years ago to get an after-school program started at West Middleton Elementary School. And that has a real interesting student demographic because you've got kids from these fairly affluent subdivisions in the western part of the district, out in the town of Middleton and so on. But because of the screwy way the school district boundaries are drawn, it also includes Elbert Park. That's actually the Middleton School District, even though it's in the city of Madison. So you have some very different cultural experiences, family experiences coming together. And they talked a lot about how significantly trauma that these children had experienced. Some of it, I mean, it wasn't only from Elbert Park kids, but from many of these kids.
Yes.
How seriously that was impacting everything that was happening at the school.
Yes.
And this was not necessarily related to the after-school program. It was maybe somewhat wedded. So, you know, I keep thinking about when I grew up, there was a song that schools were responsible for reading, writing, and arithmetic, you know, and now they're responsible for about 80 other things. Like I said, I live in Middleton. We've got a operational referendum on the ballot, and I had kind of mixed feelings about it. But after hearing you talk about it and show the growing disparity between state funding and the actual costs that schools are facing, I've changed my mind, or at least I've settled, you know, that doesn't help you, but it'll affect, you know, another.
Well, I'll call Dana Manon and tell her I talked to you.
There's at least one voice.
Oregon school district, you all know where Oregon is. We go all the way up to the Beltline. We go all the way over to Lake Wabisa. We go all the way over to Fish Hatchery Road. And so we butt up against Verona and Madison. And so you know, and when you look at some statistics, household income is a real big definer in terms of child success in school. And so some of those things follow income too. So there are trends that we have to, we have to be aware of when we look at some of these suburban districts and Madison, how Madison's changed too, of all the different kids in our districts and how they're faring and how they're interacting with each other, right? Because that's the other piece of society, right? We aren't interacting with each other really good anymore. And that plays out in the school district.
Last question then.
Just to add to what you said about forcing kids to go to referendum, I sort of call it abdicating the responsibility, but not But what that means is it's forced on the property taxes rather than state general revenue at large. And for a school district out in Calumet County, it's just devastating. It's bad enough in this case, but it's just.
It's gonna be the have and the have not.
And you look at the article, how many referendums are going to approve this, amazing, but it's not going to fund school.
Thank you very much.
State have a budget. The state has a budget surplus, right?
Yeah. So, yeah.
It has had a budget surplus for years.
Which is really interesting, which we didn't put that slide in, is the state has a fully funded rainy day fund right now. And the state has a record surplus. So the state is sitting on $6 billion right now that they have not spent. $6 billion.
But I would recommend yesterday's article in the paper. It was good. It had a little picture. I had a little picture in there. My mom called me.
Thank you very much for that. That was a great presentation and a lot of great questions there. To all our speakers, we make a contribution, Rotary International and Plus Fund, which you've heard about earlier today. Yeah, Peter will just mute you for a minute. Next week, Alice Erickson and Gail Weissman from One City Schools will be here to talk about volunteering at One City Schools. And we're going to do an in-meeting service project. We're gonna get some books for the kindergarten class, and we're all gonna write a quick note to a couple of kids. So I'll have all the supplies. If you don't need to bring anything, just bring yourselves. If you can be in person, if you're on Zoom, if you can be in person, it'd be awesome next week. So we can give them kids our support. So
the first outstanding student.
And that's right. Our first outstanding student from Edgewood will be here next week. So yeah. So thank you for being present in person on Zoom, and remember, service above self. Have a great Rotary week, everybody.